All right, good evening. We're back for the second part of our Unit 1 notes, and this is going to take us through the terrestrial or land biomes and the aquatic biomes. So 1.2 covers the terrestrial ones, and 1.3 covers all of the aquatic ones. Important for the essential knowledge stuff here, is going to be two main things. One is essentially the distribution around the world and why we find specific biomes in different parts of the world, largely due to temperature and precipitation. We cover more on the processes that form that stuff in Unit 4. It might seem a little weird that the biomes are listed in Unit 1, but then some of our processes for making climates around the world are discussed more depth in Unit 4, but we're going to cover the major important pieces for the biomes. The second one, if you look at the second essential knowledge piece here, is the list of all of the biomes, and you are expected to know all of them and some of their general characteristics. We have an activity where we're going to be putting together information on all of these biomes that we're going to be doing for a couple of blocks in class, and that's what's going to cover the essential pieces of knowledge about each individual biome. But you do need to know all of the biomes that are listed here, all of the names that are given. Now, a biome is just the area of the world where we find specific plants and animals, and it is generally based on two key factors. One is annual average temperatures around the year, and the other being precipitation. Within each biome, because of the temperature and precipitation, we're going to find specific and sometimes unique organisms that are going to live there, whether it's adapted for warmer or cooler climates, whether they're adapted for the precipitation that happens to fall. If we have precipitation annually in large amounts, if we have drier climates that don't get as much precipitation, all of the plants and animals in these specific areas are going to have their own unique characteristics based on that. You can see by the chart here that when we take these two factors into consideration, the more precipitation is going to lead to larger and larger amounts of precipitation are going to be what's needed to support forests. So when we have lots of warm temperatures and lots of rain, we're going to find our different forests in those areas. When we have less precipitation but still hot, that's going to be more of our desert and grassland areas, depending on temperature. And when we have a lack of both, then we're talking about our cooler areas like the tundra and the taiga. As part of our biome project that we're going to be doing, we're going to be covering all of these different ones that are listed here, as well as some of the locations where to find them. But typically, we can take a good guess of the hotter ones being located closer to the equator, right between our 30 and north and 30 south latitudes, and our cooler ones being found further away. We also will talk more in Unit 4 about precipitation patterns and the movement of air masses, and therefore the rain and the moisture that's found within those air masses also contributes to why we find most of our tropical regions located close to the equator, with some of our drier regions located closer to the 30 north and 30 south latitudes. Now, the latitude note here is good because we do know how all of these air masses move around the world, and because we do know that, it allows us to predict which types of biomes are more likely to be found in a specific area. Another important factor about biomes is the availability of nutrients. So the ones that are going to have higher nutrient availabilities are likely to have more decomposition, because we're going to have lots of organic matter, and we're going to have the right conditions for decomposition to allow for more of those nutrients to make their way into the soil to then support plant life, which is then going to be able to, as we talked about with our food webs, support a larger variety of organisms. And one of the things we talk about with climate change is the idea of shifting biomes, meaning that as different areas get warmer, we start to see biomes shift in the areas where we're found. The map here does a really good job of explaining specifically with one of them, the boreal forest, also known as the taiga. Typically in North America, we would find these in Canada, and you can see as well, you know, historically also in some areas of northern United States. But if you were to look at the projected movement of where the boreal forests are going to be found, they're going to be found much further north as climates in different areas get warmer. It's going to become too warm in the lower latitudes for those trees to survive, and it's possible they get outcompeted by other plant life and other trees, other vegetation that's more suited to those warmer climates. Therefore, the habitat or the area where we're going to find some more of those boreal forest trees, like they list there, aspens and spruce, is going to eventually shift further north, where their temperature and climate is going to be more what is common for them now. So that's all we're going to talk about with the terrestrial ones. Like I said, the biome book activities that we do are going to have more details on the specific terrestrial ones, and we'll cover that more in depth in class. But that does bring us to the aquatic biomes. Now, we don't have any aquatic biome projects, so there's going to be a lot more information about the aquatic biomes here. Largely, the biggest differences that we're going to talk about have to do with freshwater and marine or saltwater ecosystems, because as we should know, some organisms can only survive in freshwater, some are adapted to be able to live in saltwater environments, and then we have some areas where we get mixing of fresh and saltwater, and there's going to be organisms, as you can guess, that are adapted to that specifically. The way we define aquatic biomes is through a couple of different pieces, one of them being salinity, like I just mentioned, how much salt or a lack of salt content is going to determine what kinds of organisms can live there. The depth is also going to be a factor here. Sunlight can only reach so far into an aquatic ecosystem, so shallower ones are going to be able to support plant life that might be able to hold roots in areas like the open ocean, where photosynthesis is only going to be able to happen in the area where light can penetrate through, but you don't have anything for plants to grab onto. That's why we only see algae in those deeper areas of the ocean. Flow as well is going to determine which organisms can survive and how much oxygen is going to be found in the water. Right? Moving water is able to hold more oxygen because the movement of that water and the crashing of water against different surfaces is what helps add oxygen from the air back into the water. And all organisms, marine organisms, need oxygen to do their cell respiration. And then temperature. Warmer water is not able to hold as much oxygen, right? That's just a piece of chemistry knowledge. And because warmer water is unable to hold as much dissolved oxygen, it's not going to be able to support as many organisms. You've experienced this, which is why if you ever had a carbonated beverage in a bottle, a larger 2 liter of something, or a 1 liter bottle of a carbonated soda or a seltzer, we keep them in refrigeration so that the bubbles stay in the drink for a little bit longer and it doesn't go flat. Warmer drinks go flat faster, meaning that the carbonation escapes. Same principle applies to oxygen in our bodies of water. So one of our aquatic biomes we have to talk about is rivers and lakes. Rivers are going to have very high oxygen content due to the movement of that water, and rivers also have the ability to carry nutrient-rich material. Think either sediment that gets in that might have nutrients from the soil within it, as well as the movement of decomposing matter as well, which can contribute to nutrient availability. Lakes are standing bodies of water, so they have no flow rate. The only movement is going to be from surface winds that move that might create some currents near the surface. There's some specific vocabulary there for the lake. I don't want to say it's not important to know, but I would say that we're definitely talking about an area along the banks. That's the littoral zone, right, which is short for litter. That's where we're going to find plants and material that's able to actually grab into the soil and make roots. The limnetic area is going to be the area where light can reach, but we're not talking about the banks where plants can actually take root. We're talking about just the open water area that light can pass through. And then we have the profundal zone, which is going to be too dark for light to penetrate through, so there's no photosynthesis there. And then we're going to have the benthic area, which is would be the lake bed, so the actual soil and sediment down there, where we might find some benthic organisms that are going to live in that material. You can think bugs or any other organisms that might dig and burrow their way through. Now, we live in New Jersey, so we do have a lot of wetlands of importance. Wetlands are a very unique ecosystem and a very important one. One of the main things that they do is allow for storage of water during storms. So they are good at preventing flooding. When wetlands are built upon and urbanized, we tend to see more flooding in those areas. In New Jersey, an area very close to us is the Meadowlands, which is all wetlands, and there's been some construction there, which is where the stadiums are, and there's some housing and apartment buildings up there as well. But for the most part, a lot of those wetlands are still intact, and they act as flood storage. So anytime we get excess rain, excess water, it allows for that water to go somewhere without creating flooding in the places that people live. Wetlands also help us by recharging groundwater. With all the water that does make their way in, can move into the soil and through the rock to recharge groundwater. They also do a really good job, the plants specifically of the wetlands, to filter out pollutants that might be in that water, and then that water then either moves again into the soil to recharge groundwater, or it can be released back into the air through transpiration, and now that water's been cleaned out, and the plants take those pollutants in, but they don't end up doing, it doesn't end up affecting them specifically. The plants here are uniquely adapted to be flooded, have their roots submerged in standing water, and to be covered in water throughout pretty much the entire year. Now, because we have a lot of dead organic matter, these tend to be very productive ecosystems. So we get a lot of dead organic matter that's in those sediments, but since the plant roots can still take hold in them, they're able to absorb and use those nutrients very readily. And that means that we're going to get a lot of primary productivity, as we mentioned from the our last video discussion. And that makes wetlands one of the most productive ecosystems. We have a couple different examples here of wetlands. We have swamps, marshes, and bogs. They are individually defined by their the type of plants that we're going to see. Swamps are able to support larger woody vegetation. Marshes are more what we see around us. We have a lot of reeds and a lot of cattails. And then bogs can have a bit of both. We might see some spruce as well as some mosses that are going to be able to grow in those areas. Now that covers our freshwater ecosystems. Then it brings us to our estuaries, which are the areas where a river or body of water starts to mix with salt water from the ocean. So we do get a mixing of fresh and salt water and a variety of salt levels because of that. This allows for specific species that are able to deal with, that are salt tolerant and can deal with the changing conditions to thrive in these specific areas. They're also going to be very highly productive because we're getting all of the nutrients that are moving through these flowing water in the rivers that are able to make their way into these areas. And when the flow of water slows down in these estuaries, that allows for the nutrients to be deposited, and that allows for the plant life that lives there to to do well. One such area is what we call a salt marsh. These are typically going to be what we see maybe around our areas where we have rivers emptying out into like the Raritan River, meeting with the Atlantic Ocean. They're very good locations for fish and other organisms to spawn their young and act as a breeding ground for many different species. Mangroves are ones that we might find in more tropical areas. Mangroves are large trees, and we'll talk more about them specifically. Very important ecosystem because not only do they provide breeding grounds and a habitat for fish to live in, marine organisms to breed and have their offspring, but they also stabilize the shoreline and act as flood protection as well. So they're very important in the ecosystems we find them in. Then we start moving into the open ocean. So a shallow water marine ecosystem would be a coral reef. These are going to be very biodiverse because the algae are able to support large food webs. And when we have an abundance of algae, we're going to find in these shallow water regions an abundance of organisms that are going to eat that algae. We mentioned mutualism in our last video about corals and algae, but some specific features that coral reefs are able to do. Corals make their exoskeletons by pulling carbon dioxide out of the water, and they use that plus calcium that's dissolved in the water to create calcium carbonate, or the exoskeleton that we typically see in different marine organisms. The algae live inside, and they are able to do photosynthesis, which supports not only the corals, but also supports a wide variety of organisms. We'll talk more about corals when we talk about climate change in Unit 9 as a way to, as we view the climate, as we view the oceans through the climate change lens, and how warmer waters and acidified oceans can specifically affect corals. Another shallow water marine ecosystem is the intertidal zone. What makes this one unique is that these organisms are adapted to a couple of different things that happen along the coastline: crashing waves, periods of being submerged in water, as well as being in direct sunlight without water due to the movement of the tide. So during high tide, we're going to see organisms that everyone is going to be completely submerged. Then during low tide, those same organisms are going to be exposed to the direct sunlight. Many of them have tough outer skin or exoskeletons to prevent them from drying out. So we tend to see a lot of sea stars, starfish, crabs, barnacles that live, mussels that are adapted to live in the intertidal zone. And then the last one we have to talk about is the actual open ocean. We define the open ocean two ways: basically the area where photosynthesis can occur, the photic zone, and then the aphotic zone, where it's too deep for sunlight to actually pass through. These, despite having the largest amount of algae because of how much of our planet is open ocean, it is a low productivity area because the amount of primary productivity that's happening is spread out over such a vast region. Despite the fact that algae contribute anywhere, depending on the numbers you look at, between 40 and 50% of the oxygen that is put out into our atmosphere. So they do a lot of photosynthesis and produce a lot of oxygen, but because of how spread out it is, it's considered low in terms of primary productivity. Because remember that from our last video, primary productivity is a measure of that, a quantified number for photosynthesis, but it is taking into consideration the area, right? How much space is that photosynthesis occurring over? All right, and that's going to be the end of our second video covering the biomes. We have one more left to cover in Unit 1, and that video for Part 3 is going to cover all of the matter cycling. So we'll cover all of those in our next video.